Welcome to You and Your Democracy. It's a short take civics lesson as part of our program, Where Do We Go From Here? I'm Chuck Parkinson. Each episode, we will look at the head and heart of democracy. We will explore the values and the principles that have created our American exceptionalism and examine the structures and institutions that give us the guardrails of our democratic republic. To quote Benjamin Franklin when asked in 1787 after the Constitutional Convention, "Doctor, what have we got, a republic or monarchy?" To which Franklin responded with a rejoinder at once witty and ominous, "A republic if you can keep it." So now let's take a look at what is this great American experiment, and then ask, what do we need to do to keep it? Former chairman of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs, Indiana Congressman Lee Hamilton, said, "A foreign policy is unity is essential if the United States is to promote its values and interests effectively and help to build a safer, freer, and more prosperous world." This short take will focus on the basics of why U.S. foreign policy is important, and we'll take a quick look at China as our example. I'm pleased to be joined by Tim Stratford, Managing Partner of the Beijing office of Covington and Burling, LLP. Tim also serves as Chairman Emeritus of the American Chamber of Commerce in China. As a former Assistant U.S. Trade Representative, he is the most senior U.S. trade official working as a member of the U.S. business community in China. Except for 5 years he spent in Washington in government service from 2005 to 2010, he has lived and worked continuously in the Greater China region since 1982. In the spirit of full disclosure, you might notice a familiar last name. Tim is the cousin of our executive producer, Suzanne Stratford. Thanks for joining us today, Tim.
My pleasure.
What is foreign policy, and why should we care about it, especially with China?
Well, that's a good question. I've got a picture hanging on my wall behind me, and it was given to me by my father when I became a U.S. diplomat. And the title of the picture is "The Diplomat." And if you look at the person, it's maybe a little bit hard to figure out what the person's doing or what position the person is taking. And I think sometimes we look at diplomacy as being a very kind of a slippery kind of a thing. But in fact, I think that foreign policy affects everyday Americans in almost every aspect of our lives. And one way that I learned that was when I was working at the U.S. Embassy in Beijing many years ago. I was surprised to see that the people at the embassy were not just State Department people, but you had people from almost every government agency you could think of. Certainly the Agriculture Department, the Commerce Department, the Trade Office, the Department of Justice, the Treasury, and you can go on because all of these different areas are impacted by how we deal with other countries.
I remember a similar education for myself. I once was traveling when I was with the Senate Appropriations Committee and went to Hong Kong and met specifically at that point with the customs attaché, because that was one of the areas that we funded was the Customs Service. And at that time, we were working on issues with regard to imports of goods that were fake goods, and which has been a problem for a long time. To follow along with that, to keep it kind of basic on the foreign policy, to kind of go back to what I indicated in the opening about a freer, more united. In fact, it's, many people don't always understand that foreign policy is also a national security. The importance of foreign policy is to the degree of national security.
Well, one of the departments that we would have at a foreign embassy would be representatives from our U.S. military services. And one of the things they're supposed to do as guest diplomats in a country is to develop relations with the military in that country so that they understand one another, so that they don't have misunderstandings, and so that they have channels for dealing with any differences of view or conflicts or accidents that might arise, or to work on developing allies to work with you if you have common concerns about another country that seems to be aggressive. So that's one of the ways that an embassy helps with national security. You also have a political section in an embassy where you talk with political leaders in the other country and you see what they're thinking, what their concerns are, and you talk about things so that people can understand each other better and deal with problems before they become hot issues.
And one of the more important parts about that is the position that you served in, trade, in the importance of trade between countries from that particular perspective. And trade is very important from the agriculture sector as we talk about things. How does foreign affairs and foreign policy directly impact, say, the farmers and ranchers in South Dakota, because that's our biggest industry?
Well, sometimes we take for granted the fact that if you want to sell something to someone, you just sell it. But there are a lot of understandings and agreements that have to be in place before you can do that. For example, when I was a U.S. trade negotiator negotiating with the government of China, they didn't let U.S. beef into the country because of previous concerns about mad cow disease. And there are rules that are agreed upon in the World Trade Organization for all the many, many countries that are members of the WTO that says you should allow food products to come in so long as they meet certain scientific standards. And we were arguing to the Chinese, hey, our beef is safe, it meets all these standards. Your restrictions on US beef are not consistent with the global agreement. And so that's the kind of thing we had to negotiate. We had to negotiate with pork because the Chinese said, well, you put ractopamine in your pork and we don't accept that. And so we had to have discussions about that. Or they may block poultry shipments because they say there's been some outbreak of some avian disease in some area, and so they don't want to let us in. So we have to negotiate those agreements so that they let the agricultural products in. And there's another level at which that happens also. Sometimes countries have trading quotas. They only let so much in because they want to protect their own farmers. Or maybe they give subsidies to their farmers, and because of that, people from other countries think, well, gee, that's not fair because then our products can't compete with your products. So there are all types of issues that governments have to resolve in order to make sure that you can have an adequate flow of agricultural products.
And that leads to the fact of it does have an impact on the man and woman on the street, on Main Street, from that standpoint, that we don't always realize.
Well, one of the things that in diplomacy, as far as trade is concerned, is often you have to make balancing decisions, and these can be very tough and they can be quite political. So, for example, we may say, you should accept more of our agricultural products in your country. And they'll say, well, we'll do that if you accept and lower the tariffs you have on the trucks in your country. And so the question is, well, are we going to help our farmers and reach this agreement, but maybe our auto workers and our auto companies are going to be upset? And so these are the sorts of balancing acts that you have to do when you're doing trade negotiations.
That's another thing that draws to my career. When I first went to work as the Associate Commissioner of the Customs Service, SUVs and minivans were becoming a big issue, imports into the country. And there were no classifications. And it was a result that the SUVs were called, for lack of better, they were regulated to be a pickup truck. Well, there were 25% import tariff on pickup trucks because of one of the things I learned, the Great Chicken War.
Exactly.
1964, which
exactly.
the French put a tariff because they were the only other country at that point building pickups. And with the tariff, what it was, they then put the tariff on the chickens, not only to protect their farmers, but also to battle that fight. But that's another story.
That's a great example of it. The incoming Biden administration has said that they want to focus their trade negotiations and their trade policy on middle-class America. And that's setting a kind of a principle that they say is going to guide their negotiations. So, for example, there are different ways of balancing trade negotiations. One way is to say, we want to help the American people by making sure they have the cheapest products available so that they can get more with the buck. And we want to make sure that there are very inexpensive products that are available, and this will really help American consumers. But then people say, yeah, but if you do that, you may be importing more and you may be hurting employment for some of the American people. Or you may help this industry, but you may hurt that industry. And so these are the types of trade policy questions that have to be sorted out.
It truly is a balancing act from that standpoint. As we, short takes are really short takes. and we're about to time. Is there one thing, a takeaway from someone who's watching this program and has not really thought about foreign policy that you'd like to leave with?
Well, I think it's useful for people to become informed, because as our political leaders are making judgments in these various issues, they rely on input from the people that are affected. And so it pays to be educated, to know what the issues are, and to feel free to express your view to members of Congress and to other government officials so that your views can be reflected in their decision-making process.
I think that's one thing really to rather than the political rhetoric that often we hear about, but also to get involved, to express your concerns. I know that there are a lot of organizations, especially in the agriculture community, that have direct contact. They work with the Department of Agriculture as well as USTR. And I know from fact that here there have often been delegations that go to other countries, and they're usually led by the governor. And I know there was a recent one, not in the last couple of years, but with the former governor, Dennis Dugard, took an agricultural trip to China, which was very informative, not only for, especially for the participants that were there as well. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Well, short takes are short takes. There may seem to be simple approaches to foreign policy, but it's a complex. It must be remembered that its appreciation has direct implications on national security of the United States. Today, we touched on some very basic issues. Tim, you are off to China in a few days. Hopefully, upon your return, we will be able to continue our discussions in the future.
I hope we can have visitors from South Dakota come to see us.
That'd be great. That's our episode for now. I want to thank Tim Stratford for sharing his expertise and thoughts with us today. And as always, our executive producer, Suzanne Stratford, and the SDPB technical staff for their creativity and hard work on this program. Thank you also to the supporters of South Dakota Public Broadcasting who make this program possible. To view previous episodes in this series, go to sdpb.org/yourdemocracy. If you have comments or suggestions for future episodes, send us a note at programming@sdpb.org. Until our next short take, I'm Chuck Parkinson.